We're on the eve of the 2022 Formula 1 World Championship opener in Bahrain this Sunday, so I think it's about time that I put out my final predictions on where I think each driver will finish ahead of the upcoming season. Testing has been and gone, so we have a little bit more of an idea of where each team stands, but not enough that it won't make me look stupid when I'm completely wrong come Sunday. So here we go. Here are where I think everyone will finish in the 2022 Formula 1 World Drivers' Championship. In 20th, I've got GUANYU ZHOU. Now, somebody's got to finish last, unfortunately, and in his rookie year in Formula 1, I do expect that to be GUANYU ZHOU. I'm not entirely convinced by him. I think he's there because of his backing rather than his talent, and as well as that, I'm not entirely convinced by Alfa Romeo, even though they had a relatively decent test. I expect him to be thrashed by VALTTERI BOTTAS this year, and with Nikita Mazepin gone, I can't see anyone other than him finishing last. In 19th, I've got Kevin Magnussen. Now, Kevin Magnussen is making his return to Formula 1 after a year out to replace Nikita Mazepin. Obviously, Mazepin dropped as a result of the conflict in Ukraine, with him being a Russian driver. Magnussen returned to a team where he spent 4 years at. I think he gives a good benchmark to MICK SCHUMACHER. I think he might struggle a little bit getting back to grips with Formula 1 after that year out, because we have seen how some drivers have struggled with readjusting to that. So I do think that he will finish 19th. In 18th, I'm going with MICK SCHUMACHER. Now look, MICK SCHUMACHER had a okay rookie year in 2021. He thrashed Nikita Mazepin, but now he's got a proper benchmark up against experienced driver in Kevin Magnussen. And I do fancy him to actually beat Magnussen across the year, but we will have to see how that goes. Because of how I think the HAAS will do this year, I do think that he will be limited to 18. In 17th, I've got Nicholas Latifi. Now look, Nicholas Latifi has shown year-on-year improvement since he joined the sport in 2020, but I still think he's probably the second weakest driver on the grid. I do have high hopes for Williams this year, but I do think that he will be lagging a long way behind Alex Albon, which could actually end up seeing him replaced at the end of this year. So for now, I do think he's going to finish 17th, but I think that Williams will be a better car than that. In 16th, I've got VALTTERI BOTTAS. Now look, VALTTERI BOTTAS is a 10-time Grand Prix winner, and he probably deserves a car that's going to be a lot higher up the field. But as I've mentioned before, I'm not convinced by Alfa Romeo, even though they have had a good test. I expect him to thrash GUANYU ZHOU, and I do think we will see some standout qualifying performances at least. But what he has struggled with in his Mercedes times is wheel-to-wheel combat and restarts. And I think that's going to be vitally important when you're in the middle of the pack. So I could see him actually struggling quite a bit, but I do think he will get the odd standout result, which will boost him up to 16th in the standings. In 15th, I've got Alex Albon. So Albon is obviously making his return to the grid with Williams to replace George Russell after a year as Red Bull's reserve driver. And I do have a good feeling about this move. Like I said numerous times already, I think Williams are going to be a lot better this year. And I just have a feeling that Alex Albon is going to get the best out of that car. Now look, maybe not as much so as George Russell had, but I still think it's going to be a good year, and he's going to finish 15th. In 14th, I've got YUKI TSUNODA. Now, look, YUKI TSUNODA is under a little bit of pressure this year, I think, as I mentioned in my first video on this channel. I do think he has to perform this year, or he's going to be under a lot of pressure from some of the Red Bull juniors that are coming through in Formula 2 at the minute. But, that being said, I do expect him to have a better year. Now, the only thing for him is I don't think the car is going to be as quick as it was last year, meaning that it probably won't see an improvement in the standings, but I do expect to see a more consistent season from him. In 13th, I've got Lance Stroll. Now, look, I don't know, like I mentioned in the last video, what way Aston Martin are going to be this season. Now, look, we have seen them in testing, and they don't look great. So I do think that Lance Stroll is the weaker of the two drivers that are there. So I do think it will be another season in 13th. But hopefully he could maybe get one of those kind of weird Lance Stroll results that he gets every now and again in a crazy race, which might bump him up the order a little bit. 12th, I've got Pierre Gasly. Now, look, Pierre Gasly's become one of the most consistent drivers in the field over the last couple of years, ever since he was dropped by Red Bull. And I do expect that to kind of continue this year, but again, like I mentioned, I don't think the AlphaTauri is going to be as quick as it was last year, so I do struggle to see him qualifying, 5th and 6th like he was on such a regular basis last season. So I do think he will kind of drop down the order a little bit, but he should have a big move ahead of him, ahead of 2023. In 11th, I've got Esteban Ocon. Now look, I don't really know what's going on with Alpine at the minute. I was a lot more confident about them making improvements this year before I saw them in testing, where they looked a bit shaky, they look a bit on the back foot, so I really don't know where they're going to be come qualifying on Saturday. So Esteban Ocon, I think 11th place is probably as good as it's going to get, but I don't think it's going to necessarily be any fault of his own. I think the car might just not be where they need it to be. In 10th, we've got Sebastian Vettel. Now look, again, this midfield area is just so difficult to predict at the minute, because I don't think Alpine or Aston Martin in testing looked anywhere near where I thought they would look, and a lot of these predictions were kind of premeditated. So again, it's kind of a bit of a toss-up. Sebastian Vettel could finish 10th or he could finish 16th. I really don't know. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they are going to improve across the season with their resources and their backing from Lawrence Stroll. I do think he might get the odd standout result like he did last year, and that the car will improve over time. In 9th, I've got Fernando Alonso. Now, I really, really wish I could put Fernando Alonso higher. Out of the kind of drivers between Alpine and Aston Martin, I do think he's going to be the one that would get the most out of the car, if it is struggling a little bit, hence why I kind of have him at the top of this little kind of mini section, I guess. I think there was a lot of hype going around Alpine, and particularly around Fernando Alonso, that he could maybe challenge for the title this year. But I don't think Alpine have got it right, unfortunately. And I do think that, kind of top of the midfield is kind of where he's going to be looking to be. In 8th, I've got Daniel Ricciardo. Now, I had originally got Daniel Ricciardo a little bit higher in this list. I kind of expected him to have a bounce back year after a struggle in 2021. I did actually originally intend to have him above Lando Norris in this list. But then he tested positive for COVID and missed all of testing. And I think that's going to put him on the back foot going into Bahrain. You compare the amount of running that Lando Norris got. He got, I think, over 200 laps, or maybe 200 laps on the dot. Whereas Daniel Ricciardo got 0. So he's already on the back foot. And, Lando Norris had the measure of him last year. So I do think it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. But I'm hoping I'm wrong, because he's my favourite driver. But for now, I can't really justify putting him any higher than 8th. In 7th, then, I have got Lando Norris. Again, look, Lando Norris has been really consistent over the last couple of years since he came into the sport in 2019. I expect that to continue. Now, my only doubts kind of are over where exactly the McLaren stand. In Spain, in the kind of shakedown testing, and maybe at the start of the test in Bahrain, they look good. They look like they could maybe compete with the kind of 3 teams that are going to be above them, I think, this year. But then they did seem to kind of have a couple of issues. Like, I saw an interview with Andrea Seidel, who looked a little bit kind of miffed as to what was going on. They have some issues that they need to sort out. Now look, if they can sort those issues out, they could be right up there, but I do think that they are kind of going to be maybe competing with each other, Ricciardo and Norris, kind of more so than they will be competing with the guys above them. In 6th, I have got Sergio Perez. Now, originally I did have Sergio Perez to be a little bit lower in this list, until the last day of testing, when the Red Bulls came out. They looked really, really strong. Max Verstappen looked really quick. Perez didn't look particularly slow either. So I do think that they're probably a bit safe from the McLarens, but the only thing that's going to stop Sergio Perez from finishing any higher in the standing this year is qualifying performances. Now look, the Red Bull were at worst the second quickest car last year, and for large parts they were the quickest car, but yet he was still qualifying maybe 5th, 6th, 7th sort of thing, even on occasion getting knocked out in Q2. So if there is more competition, the field is a lot closer, and he's still having these qualifying struggles, that 5th and 6th could turn very easily into 10th or 11th, which I can't see the 5 drivers that I'm going to have ahead of him having those sort of problems. So for me, I think he's going to be kind of the bottom of the drivers in the top 3 teams, in 6th place. In 5th, I have got Carlos Sainz. Now look, the Ferraris have looked immense in testing, as I thought they would at the start of the season. And I think, look, anyone kind of from here upwards, I think, could challenge the title this year. I just think that out of all of the ones that are left, I think Carlos Sainz has the least raw pace out of them. Now look, he has the consistency. He didn't retire from a single race last year, and kind of finished best of the rest for Ferrari last year. So it wouldn't surprise me if he went on to win the title, but I just do think that the rest of the drivers in there are maybe a little bit more complete, and definitely have a little bit more raw pace. But I do expect him to be kind of up there, and he will be really important for Ferrari when it comes to the Constructors' Championship as well. So he'll finish with 5th for me. In 4th, I have got George Russell. So George Russell is obviously moving from Williams to Mercedes, and he's going to get his kind of first real long stint in a car that's probably going to be capable of challenging. Now, the only thing is, the Mercedes, they looked a little bit off of it in testing, but how many times in the past have we seen Mercedes go into testing and look a little bit on the back foot, only to turn up and win the first race of the season and kind of dominate from there. So I do kind of think that I'm gonna be very cautious about thinking that Mercedes are going to be off the pace, and I'm going to stick with where I originally had George Russell and keep him in 4th. The big test up against Lewis Hamilton. I don't think he's going to be too far behind him, though. I do think that his qualifying performances in particular are going to put him in a great position. So I think he'll finish 4th for now, with maybe a view to challenging for the title in kind of the years following. But 4th for now I think would be a good first year. In 3rd, I have got Lewis Hamilton. Now, this is again a kind of a last-minute change. I had originally got him in 2nd in this list, but the testing has changed my mind on things a little bit. And not necessarily Mercedes looking on the back foot as such, but it's more pace from the Red Bull and the Ferraris than I expected. Look, I expected the Ferraris to be quick, but I didn't expect the Red Bulls to look as good as they did towards the end of that test. But look, you'd be a brave man to bet against Lewis Hamilton. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he turned up and put it on pole in Bahrain and took all the points and romped to another title. But for now, I've just got a bit of a feeling that he might be a little bit on the back foot. Last season he realistically probably should have won the title if not for Michael Massey. But we did see some kind of uncharacteristic errors from him last season at times. Imola, Baku, I won't call Silverstone a mistake, but there was a couple of dicey moments that we haven't been used to seeing from Lewis Hamilton over the last couple of years. And he may very well come back with more motivation than ever, but he didn't look entirely happy with the car after testing. And look, again, we've seen that happen before, and he comes off and romps to a title, but I don't know, I just have a feeling that maybe it might be just a step too far from this year, and 3rd place will be where he'll finish. In 2nd, I have got the reigning defending champion of the world, Max Verstappen. Again, look, this Max was the one that I had in 3rd going into this season. I thought the Red Bulls would struggle a lot more than they did, and look, at times they kind of looked like they would at the start of the test, but Saturday, the last day of testing, that car looked rapid. It looked absolutely rapid, and it looked like there was a lot more time for Max to find him there. I don't think he was too far off of his practice times last season in Bahrain, which is a testament to where they found themselves with that car. They obviously came with a little bit of a new design on Saturday, which has given them a lot more pace, and Christian Horner and Helmut Marko looked a lot more happy with where they were on the Saturday test. So, I think he is the best driver on the grid, Max Verstappen. I think if he is given a car that is the best on the field, I think he will win the title. But I'm on another hype train at the minute. So, second place for now for Max Verstappen. But again, you would not be surprised at all if he did come off and run to the title if Red Bull do get it right. And finally, my predicted world champion for 2022 is Charles Leclerc. Now, look, I've been on the Charles Leclerc Ferrari kind of hype train for the last year or so, since they had a bad year in 2020. I did kind of expect them to return to the front of the field this year. And look, it's been a long time coming. They haven't won the title, the Drivers' Championship anyway, since 2007, looking me right. And for a team as big as Ferrari, that's not really good enough. But I do think that, particularly after testing, they do look the quickest car. I think everyone kind of feels like they are the ones to beat going into Bahrain, and Bahrain's always been quite a strong track for Ferrari anyway. So I do think that this could be the year that Charles Leclerc takes the title, but I do think it's going to be tight between him, Verstappen, Hamilton, maybe even Russell and Sainz might get involved in that as well. I do think it will be a really, really closely fought contest, but I just have a feeling that this will be the year for Ferrari, and it will be the year for Charles Leclerc that they do go on and take the title. So for me, Charles Leclerc will be your 2022 Formula 1 World Champion. So those are my predictions for the 2022 Drivers' Championship. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to give me a like, a subscribe, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with my driver lineup predictions for the 2023 season.